Imagine standing in the center of a city so vast and sophisticated that it would not be equaled in size or grandeur for another 1,500 years. Picture a metropolis of 1 million people, bustling with merchants from every corner of the known world, where clean water flows through aqueducts taller than modern skyscrapers, and where the law governs every aspect of life, from the price of bread to the rights of a father over his family. Now, imagine that this city, the pinnacle of human achievement, was built on a foundation of absolute brutality, where men fought to the death for the entertainment of the crowd, and slavery was the engine that drove the economy. This is the paradox of Rome, a civilization that gave us the blueprint for modern democracy, engineering, and law, yet operated with a ruthlessness that is almost impossible to comprehend today. Welcome to the channel, everyone. I am Alex, and today we are embarking on an epic journey through the annals of history to explore the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. We are going to peel back the layers of myth and legend to reveal the real people, the gritty battles, and the political machinations that shaped the Western world. From the mud huts of a tiny village on the Tiber River to the marble palaces of the Caesars, we will witness the transformation of a republic into an autocracy and the incredible legacy that Rome left behind. If you are fascinated by the ancient world and want to discover how a small Italian tribe came to dominate the globe, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Also, I want to know what aspect of Roman history intrigues you the most. Is it their military tactics, their politics, or their daily life? Write a comment below and let's get the conversation started. Now, let us travel back to the very beginning, to a time when the world was young and Rome was just a glint in the eye of destiny. Our story begins not with the grandeur of emperors, but in the dim, dusty past of the Italian peninsula around the 8th century before Christ. Archaeology tells us that the area of Rome was inhabited by simple farmers living in thatched huts scattered across the 7 hills. These were not the sophisticated Romans we know, but rough pastoralists who made their living from the difficult soil and traded salt from the marshes at the mouth of the Tiber River. Life was harsh, survival was uncertain, and the future was anything but guaranteed. Legend, however, paints a much more dramatic picture. You have likely heard the story of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers suckled by a she-wolf. While the wolf is almost certainly a myth, likely a symbol adopted from local tribes, the story of a violent fratricide reflects the brutal reality of early Roman politics. According to the tale, Romulus killed his brother Remus in a dispute over where to build the city's walls, establishing a precedent that violence would forever be a tool of statecraft in Rome. The reality of Rome's early growth was likely a process called synocism, where distinct villages on the separate hills gradually merged. This merger was not peaceful. It involved conquest and assimilation of the surrounding Latin tribes. But Rome was not alone in Italy. To the north lay the Etruscans, a mysterious civilization that dominated much of central Italy. The Etruscans were wealthy, cultured, and technologically advanced. They taught the Romans how to read the entrails of animals, how to build arches, and how to drain the swampy valleys between the hills to create the Roman Forum. For a time, Rome was ruled by Etruscan kings. The last of these kings was Tarquin the Proud, a tyrant whose actions would set Rome on a path toward revolution. The breaking point came when his son violated a noblewoman named Lucretia, who subsequently took her own life to protect her family's honor. This act of brutality ignited the Roman aristocracy. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, The Romans rose up and expelled the monarchy in the year 509 before Christ. They vowed never again to bow to a single ruler. Thus was born the Roman Republic, a government defined by a complex system of checks and balances. They created a constitution, though it wasn't written down. Power was divided between two consuls, who were elected annually and could veto each other's decisions, and the Senate, a body of elder statesmen who advised the consuls. This system was designed to prevent any one man from seizing absolute power. Yet it was heavily skewed in favor of the wealthy patrician class. The early republic was a time of constant struggle, known as the conflict of the orders. The plebeians, the common citizens, demanded rights. They seceded from the city several times, refusing to fight in the army until they were granted concessions. Over centuries, they won the right to elect their own tribunes, officials who had the power to protect them from the magistrates. It was a slow, grinding process of political evolution that gave Rome a unique stability. By sharing power and citizenship, albeit grudgingly, Rome was able to mobilize its entire population for war. And war was coming. Rome began to expand, first dominating the Latin League, then clashing with the formidable Samnite tribes in the rugged Apennine Mountains. The Samnite Wars were brutal affairs that tested Roman resolve. The Romans suffered humiliating defeats, such as the Battle of the Caudine Forks, where an entire Roman army was forced to pass under a yoke of spears in a ritual of surrender. But the Romans did not stay defeated. They adapted their military, introducing the manipular system, which made their legions flexible and deadly on uneven terrain. By the beginning of the 3rd century before Christ, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. They were not just conquerors, they were smart diplomats. They often granted partial citizenship to the defeated tribes, allowing them to share in the spoils of war while demanding they supply troops for future campaigns. This created a snowball effect. Rome won, absorbed the enemy's manpower, and used that manpower to conquer the next neighbor. They were now a regional power, but the wider world was about to come knocking, and the conflict would push Rome to the very brink of destruction. As Rome's gaze turned outward, across the shimmering waters of the Mediterranean, they encountered a rival unlike any they had faced before. Carthage, a powerful Phoenician city-state located in modern-day Tunisia, was the master of the sea. Its empire stretched across North Africa, into Spain, and dominated the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. The clash between Rome and Carthage was inevitable, and it would produce the First World War in human history, the Punic Wars. The First Punic War was a contest of wills that lasted 23 grueling years. It began over a dispute in Sicily, but it quickly became a struggle for control of the Mediterranean. Rome, a land power, realized it could not defeat Carthage without a navy. In a stunning display of Roman engineering and determination, they built a fleet from scratch. They copied a captured Carthaginian ship and built 100 quinqueremes and 20 triremes in just 60 days. But they were still inexperienced sailors. To compensate, they invented the corvus, a boarding bridge with a heavy spike that would crash into an enemy ship, locking them together and allowing Roman infantry to fight as if on land. The war was a series of disasters and triumphs, marked by massive naval storms that destroyed Roman fleets, yet Rome rebuilt them again and again. Finally, at the Battle of the Agates Islands in 241 before Christ, Rome's rebuilt and experienced fleet smashed the Carthaginians. Carthage sued for peace, surrendering Sicily. It was Rome's first province. But Carthage was not finished. They rebuilt their economy in Spain, looking for revenge. The spark for the Second Punic War came in 218 before Christ, when a brilliant young Carthaginian commander named Hannibal Barca laid siege to the Spanish city of Saguntum, a Roman ally. Rome declared war, expecting to fight in Spain. Instead, Hannibal did the impossible. He led an army of 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants on a harrowing march across the Alps. It was a journey of almost unimaginable hardship. The cold was biting, the paths were treacherous, and hostile Gallic tribes attacked them constantly. Hannibal lost half his army and most of his elephants, but he descended into the Po Valley of Italy like a thunderbolt. He was there, on Roman soil, and no one was expecting him. Rome panicked. They sent a hastily raised army to stop him at the Trebia River, but Hannibal's tactical genius crushed them. Then came the disaster at Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal ambushed and destroyed another Roman army in the fog. The Romans were humiliated again and again. Finally, they assembled a massive force of 85,000 men, the largest army in Roman history, to crush Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae. What followed was a masterpiece of military tactics. Hannibal, outnumbered, lured the Romans into the center of his line, where his weaker infantry bent but did not break. As the Romans pushed forward, thinking they were winning, Hannibal's African infantry swung around the flanks, while his cavalry closed the trap from behind. The Romans were surrounded. It was a slaughter. 50,000 Romans died that day, making Cannae the greatest defeat in Roman history. The road to Rome was open. The Romans expected Hannibal to march on the city and destroy it. But he hesitated. He lacked siege equipment, and perhaps believed that Rome's Italian allies would abandon them. He sent a message to Rome offering peace, but the Senate sent a defiant reply. No peace with Hannibal. Rome refused to surrender. The years that followed were a war of attrition. Hannibal wandered Italy, trying to win over cities, but he could never force Rome to surrender. Meanwhile, a brilliant Roman general named Scipio Africanus devised a new strategy. If Rome couldn't beat Hannibal in Italy, he would beat Carthage in Africa. Scipio invaded North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home to defend his city. The two titans finally met at the Battle of Zama in 202 before Christ. For the first time, Hannibal was outmaneuvered. Scipio had studied his tactics. He neutralized the Carthaginian elephants and used his superior cavalry to hammer the flanks. Hannibal was defeated, and Carthage surrendered. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The victory brought immense wealth and a new sense of destiny, but it also changed the character of the Republic. The returning generals were treated like gods, and the gap between the rich and the poor began to widen dangerously. The Republic was becoming an empire in everything but name. The victory over Carthage brought Rome into contact with the ancient cultured kingdoms of the East, the successors of Alexander the Great. Rome's expansion into the Hellenistic world was not initially about conquest, but about intervention. The Romans saw themselves as liberators, freeing Greek cities from the rule of kings like Philip V of Macedon and Antiochus the Great of Syria. However, once Rome intervened, they never really left. They defeated Philip at the Battle of Cynocephalae, where the flexibility of the Roman legions proved superior to the rigid Macedonian phalanx. They defeated Antiochus at Magnesia. By the middle of the 2nd century before Christ, Rome was the sole superpower of the Mediterranean. But this power came at a cost. The wealth that flooded into Rome created a class of super-rich aristocrats who bought up the land, pushing the small farmers off their fields. These farmers, who were the backbone of the army, drifted to Rome, swelling the ranks of the urban poor. The social fabric was tearing apart. In this atmosphere of desperation, two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, attempted to save the Republic from itself. They were patricians, but they championed the cause of the plebeians. Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune in 133 before Christ. He proposed a land reform law to redistribute public land to the poor. The Senate was outraged, viewing it as a direct attack on their power. In an unprecedented move, Tiberius bypassed the Senate and took his bill directly to the plebeian assembly. When another tribune vetoed the bill, Tiberius held a vote to remove him from office, an act of constitutional chaos. The Senate responded with violence. A mob of senators and their clients, led by the high priest, beat Tiberius Gracchus to death with the legs of broken chairs. It was the first political murder in the history of the Republic. A floodgate of violence had been opened. 10 years later, his brother Gaius took up the mantle. He was even more charismatic and pushed for even wider reforms, including giving citizenship to Rome's Italian allies. This terrified the Senate, who did not want to share the privileges of Roman citizenship. Like his brother, Gaius was met with violence. In a confrontation with the Senate's forces, he ordered a slave to kill him. A purge followed, with 3,000 of his supporters executed without trial. The Gracchi brothers had tried to fix the system from within, but their deaths showed that the system was broken. Now, the military would become the new arena for politics. A man named Gaius Marius rose from a poor background to become one of Rome's greatest generals. He realized that the citizen soldier class was dying out because there were no landowners left to serve. So, he opened the army to the landless poor. This professionalized the legions. The soldiers now swore loyalty to the general who paid them, and promised them land upon retirement, not to the abstract state. Marius saved Rome from a massive invasion of Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, in a series of brilliant victories. He was hailed as the third founder of Rome, but his reforms had unintended consequences. When a rival general, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, was given command of a war against King Mithridates in the east, Marius used his political allies to steal the command. Sulla, a patrician to his core, did not accept this. He did something no Roman had ever dared. He marched his legions on Rome. Sulla captured the city and declared his enemies enemies of the state. Marius fled, but eventually his supporters regained power, leading to a bloody purge of Sulla's allies. When Sulla returned from the east, having defeated Mithridates, he marched on Rome a second time. He entered the city, began a reign of terror known as the Proscriptions, and posted lists of enemies who were to be killed on sight. He became dictator, rewriting the constitution to restore power to the Senate. But his dictatorship was the final nail in the coffin of the Republic. He had proven that raw military force could trump any law. Which Roman general do you think was the most brilliant tactician, Marius or Sulla? I would love to hear your theories in the comments below. Sulla eventually retired and died in his bed, a rare feat for a Roman dictator. But the damage was done. The Republic was a carcass, and the wolves were circling. Two men would rise from the ashes of Sulla's dictatorship to finish what he started: Gnaeus Pompey Magnus and Julius Caesar. They would take the rivalry to a level never seen before. With Sulla gone, the Republic was a hollow shell, held together by fragile alliances and the ambition of powerful men. Into this void stepped three men who decided to carve up the Roman world among themselves. They formed what historians call the First Triumvirate, a secret alliance between Pompey the Great, the most celebrated commander of his age, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and a young rising star named Julius Caesar. Pompey had cleaned up the Mediterranean of pirates and conquered the East, bringing immense wealth to Rome. Crassus had made his fortune through slave trafficking and real estate, famously saying that a man is not rich unless he can pay his own army. Julius Caesar was the junior partner, but he possessed something the others lacked: the love of the Roman mob and a burning, limitless ambition. To cement the alliance, Caesar gave his only daughter, Julia, to Pompey in marriage. The triumvirate used their combined influence to control the elections. Crassus got a command in the east, Pompey got Spain, and Caesar got the governorship of Illyricum and Gaul. It was in Gaul that Caesar would forge his legend, and the sword that would eventually destroy the Republic. Caesar spent 8 years in Gaul, fighting a war of conquest that was characterized by its speed and brutality. He defeated the Helvetii, crossed the Rhine into Germany, and even launched the first Roman invasion of the mist-shrouded island of Britain. He fought a massive confederation of Gallic tribes led by the heroic chieftain Vercingetorix. At the siege of Alesia, Caesar built a double line of fortifications, circumvallation and contravallation, to trap Vercingetorix inside while fending off a massive relief army. It was a masterpiece of siege engineering. Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gaul was pacificated. Caesar sent dispatches back to Rome, written in the third person, recounting his victories in a simple, direct style that captivated the public. He distributed the vast loot of Gaul to his soldiers and the people of Rome, making himself immensely popular. However, back in Rome, the triumvirate was crumbling. Crassus, eager for glory, invaded Parthia and was killed at the Battle of Carrhae, where his head was used as a prop in a Greek play. Then, Julia died in childbirth, severing the bond between Caesar and Pompey. The Senate, led by Pompey, saw Caesar as a threat. They ordered him to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution. Caesar knew that if he returned without his army, he was finished. He stood on the banks of the Rubicon River, the northern border of Italy. To cross it with an army was treason, an act of war. "The die is cast," he is said to have muttered. He crossed. The Republic was plunged into civil war. Pompey and the Senate underestimated Caesar's speed. They fled Italy, gathering their forces in the east. Caesar chased them, defeating them at Pharsalus in Greece, despite being outnumbered 2-1. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by courtiers hoping to curry favor with Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was presented with Pompey's head. He wept. Egypt was in the midst of its own civil war between the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra. Caesar sided with Cleopatra, and the two became lovers. With Cleopatra installed on the throne, Caesar defeated the remaining Pompeian forces in Africa and Spain. He returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the world. He was appointed dictator for life. He began sweeping reforms, redistributing land, reforming the calendar to the Julian calendar we still use today, and planning great public works. But to many senators, he looked like a king. The Romans had a visceral hatred of the word king. A group of senators led by Marcus Brutus and Cassius Longinus formed a conspiracy. On the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 before Christ, they surrounded Caesar in the Senate and stabbed him 23 times. Caesar fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, covered in blood. The conspirators believed that by killing the tyrant, they would restore the republic. They had misread the room. The people did not want a republic. They wanted a strong man who provided for them. The assassination sparked another civil war, and this time there would be no restoration. The death of Caesar left Rome in a power vacuum that quickly sucked the city back into violence. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, fled to the east to raise armies. Back in Rome, the situation was chaotic. Caesar had left no clear heir, except in his will, where he named his grandnephew Octavian as his adopted son. Octavian was a sickly 19-year-old student in Greece when he heard the news. He traveled to Rome and immediately claimed his inheritance. He was young, inexperienced, and underestimated by everyone, but he possessed the name of Caesar. However, the real power lay with Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant and friend. Antony controlled the legions and the treasury. He and Octavian initially clashed, but they realized they had common enemies. Along with a third general, Lepidus, they formed the Second Triumvirate, an official body with the power to rule the state. Unlike the First Triumvirate, this was not a secret pact. It was a legal dictatorship. The triumvirs immediately launched a purge of their enemies. They drew up lists of senators and equites who were to be killed. Their property was confiscated, and their heads were displayed in the forum. One of the most prominent victims was Cicero, the great orator who had defended the Republic. His hands and tongue were cut off and nailed to the rostra. The terror was worse than Sulla's, because it was done by 3 men, not 1. With their enemies at home eliminated, the triumvirs turned their attention to the assassins. The forces of Octavian and Antony clashed with Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia. It was a 2-part battle. In the first engagement, Cassius, believing he was defeated, ordered his freedmen to kill him. Mutus fought on but was eventually defeated and committed suicide. The Republic was avenged, but the Republic was dead. After Philippi, the world was divided. Antony took the wealthy east to deal with the Parthian threat, and Octavian took the west to settle the veterans and consolidate power. Lepidus was eventually sidelined, leaving just 2 men. In the east, Antony met Cleopatra again. They formed a romantic and political alliance. Antony began to live like an Eastern king, even divorcing Octavian's sister to marry Cleopatra. This was the political mistake Octavian was waiting for. Octavian launched a propaganda war against Antony. He read Antony's will aloud in the Senate, which allegedly bequeathed Roman territories to Cleopatra's children and asked to be buried in Alexandria. Octavian portrayed Antony as a traitor who had gone native, enslaved by a foreign queen. The Senate declared war on Cleopatra. The final conflict of the Roman Republic was fought at the Battle of Actium in 31 before Christ. It was a naval battle off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet was commanded by his brilliant admiral Agrippa. Antony and Cleopatra had a larger fleet, but their ships were heavy and cumbersome. The battle was a stalemate until Cleopatra, seeing the tide turn, broke through the line and fled to open sea. Antony, in a fit of despair, abandoned his fleet and followed her. Their army, abandoned, surrendered to Octavian. Octavian pursued the lovers to Egypt. With his forces closing in, Antony fell on his sword. He died in Cleopatra's arms. Cleopatra tried to charm Octavian, but she failed to seduce him. She famously committed suicide, according to legend, by allowing an asp to bite her. With the death of Antony and Cleopatra, Egypt became a province of Rome. Octavian stood alone as the master of the Roman world. He returned to Rome in 29 before Christ, entering the city in a magnificent triumph that lasted 3 days. The gates of the Temple of Janus were finally closed, symbolizing that peace had been restored. But Octavian was smart. He knew what happened to Caesar. He did not call himself king or dictator. He handed back power to the Senate and the people. But in reality, he kept control of the army, the provinces, and the treasury. He took the title of First Citizen, or Princeps. The Senate gave him the honorific name Augustus, meaning the revered one. The Republic was transformed into the Principate, the first phase of the Roman Empire. Augustus ruled for 40 years. He famously found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He reorganized the administration, created a professional police force and fire brigade, and stabilized the borders. It was the beginning of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a 200-year period of relative stability and prosperity that allowed the arts and commerce to flourish. The days of the civil wars were over, but the age of the emperors had begun. The peace established by Augustus was maintained through a clever balance of powers, but the stability depended entirely on the character of the man at the top. When Augustus died in the year 14 after Christ, power passed smoothly to his stepson, Tiberius. Tiberius was a capable general and administrator, but he was a dark, dour, and suspicious man. His reign started well enough, but after the death of his son, he retreated to the island of Capri, leaving the governance of Rome to his ambitious and ruthless prefect, Sejanus. Sejanus plotted against Tiberius's family, but eventually Tiberius turned on him and had him executed. Tiberius's later years were marked by treason trials and paranoia, and he left Rome with a deep sense of fear and repression. When Tiberius died, he was succeeded by Caligula, the son of the beloved Germanicus. Caligula's first months were joyful. He recalled exiles and lowered taxes, but then he fell seriously ill. When he recovered, his personality had transformed into madness. He began to rule with erratic cruelty. He reportedly slept with his sisters and killed for entertainment. He famously made his horse a priest and hinted at making it a consul. He depleted the treasury on lavish games and absurd projects. His reign ended after just 4 years, when the Praetorian Guard, fed up with his insanity, assassinated him. The assassination of Caligula marked a turning point. The army realized it could make and unbreak emperors. They found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain in the palace, and proclaimed him emperor. Claudius was a man with a limp and a stutter, whom his family had mocked and ignored. But behind the physical frailty was a sharp intellect. He proved to be an efficient administrator. He finally conquered Britain, a feat that had eluded Caesar, and built a massive new harbor at Ostia to ensure Rome's grain supply. However, he was unlucky in love. He married his niece, Agrippina the Younger, who was ambitious and ruthless. She is believed to have poisoned him with a dish of mushrooms to secure the throne for her son, Nero. Nero was just 17 when he became emperor, and at first he was guided by wise counselors like the philosopher Seneca and the prefect Burrus. The first 5 years of his reign were known as the Golden Age, where the government functioned well and the arts flourished. But as Nero grew older, he pushed his advisors aside. He wanted to be a performer, a singer, and a poet, which was considered undignified for an emperor. He loved to compete in public games and forced the elite to attend his long, self-indulgent performances. Nero's reputation was forever scarred by the Great Fire of Rome in the year 64. The fire raged for 6 days, destroying large parts of the city. Legend says Nero played his lyre and sang about the destruction of Troy while watching the flames. While this is likely an exaggeration, it is true that he used the cleared land to build his massive golden palace, the Domus Aurea. To deflect blame, he scapegoated the Christians, a small religious sect, initiating the first state persecution of Christians in Rome. Nero became increasingly tyrannical, executing his rivals and even his own wife. Eventually, the governors of the provinces rebelled. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy. Abandoned by everyone, Nero committed suicide, lamenting, "What an artist the world is losing in me." With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, founded by Augustus, came to an end. The year 69 became known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Generals Galba, Otho, and Vitellius rose and fell in rapid succession, each murdered or forced to suicide. Finally, the armies of the East and the Danube rallied behind Vespasian. He was a tough, no-nonsense general who had been busy putting down a revolt in Judea. Vespasian marched on Rome, defeated Vitellius, and restored order. Vespasian founded the Flavian dynasty. He was a pragmatic emperor who restored the empire's finances and began the construction of the Colosseum, the largest amphitheater ever built, on the site of Nero's lake. He was succeeded by his son Titus, who was popular and generous, though his reign was marred by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum. Titus died young, and his brother Domitian took the throne. Domitian was a competent but authoritarian ruler who ruled for 15 years before being assassinated by court officials. Following the Flavians came a remarkable period known as the Age of the Five Good Emperors. Starting with Nerva, the emperors adopted their successors, rather than passing power to their sons, ensuring that the most capable men ruled. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia and annexing Mesopotamia. Hadrian consolidated the borders, building his famous wall in Britain, and traveling to every province to improve administration. Antoninus Pius reigned during a time of supreme peace, and Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, spent his reign defending the empire against barbarian invasions and the plague. It was the peak of the Roman Empire, a time of military might and cultural brilliance. But even at its zenith, the seeds of decay were beginning to sprout. The golden age of the five good emperors ended with Marcus Aurelius. He broke the tradition of adoption and passed the throne to his son, Commodus. This was a disaster. Commodus was not a philosopher. He was a megalomaniac who believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He neglected state affairs to fight in the arena, killing exotic animals and gladiators for the amusement of the mob. His incompetence and cruelty eroded the respect for the imperial office. He was eventually strangled in the bath by a wrestler, marking the end of the Pax Romana. The 3rd century became a time of unprecedented crisis, known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. The empire was attacked on all fronts by the Goths on the Danube, the Sassanid Persians in the east, and Germanic tribes along the Rhine. To make matters worse, the empire was torn apart by civil war. Generals were declared emperor by their troops, only to be assassinated by rivals. In a span of 50 years, there were over 20 emperors, most of whom met violent deaths. The economy collapsed, plagued by hyperinflation and the debasement of the coinage. Plagues swept through the population, decimating the workforce. It looked as though the Roman Empire would disintegrate completely, but it was saved by a series of tough soldier emperors. The most important of these was Diocletian. He rose through the ranks and eventually seized power. Diocletian realized the empire was simply too large for one man to govern effectively, especially under constant threat of invasion. He introduced a radical new system called the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four. He appointed a co-emperor, Maximian, to rule the West, while he ruled the East. Each emperor had a junior colleague, a Caesar, to assist them and serve as their successor. This division allowed the empire to meet threats on multiple fronts simultaneously. Diocletian also reformed the bureaucracy, creating a massive, structured government where everyone had a place and everyone paid taxes. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, trying to control inflation by freezing wages and prices, though this was largely unsuccessful. Diocletian also brutally persecuted Christians, refusing to accept a religion that claimed loyalty to a god other than the emperor. After 20 years of ruling, Diocletian did something unprecedented. He voluntarily abdicated and retired to his palace to grow cabbages. His tetrarchy, however, did not survive his retirement. His successors fought amongst themselves, and the empire was once again united under one man, Constantine the Great. Constantine's reign was pivotal. Before the decisive Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, Constantine had a vision of a cross in the sky and the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. He won the battle and became the sole ruler. Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which granted religious tolerance to Christianity. He was a shrewd politician who saw the power of the growing Christian church. Perhaps his most lasting decision was the founding of a new capital. He moved the seat of power from Rome to the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It was strategically located on the Bosporus Strait, controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia. It was heavily fortified and quickly grew into a magnificent city. This shift marked the beginning of the end for the old Rome in the West. The center of gravity was moving east. As the Western Empire weakened, the Eastern Empire flourished. The barbarian pressure on the western frontiers became overwhelming. In the year 410, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoths, led by King Alaric, sacked the city of Rome. It was the first time in 800 years that Rome had been taken by a foreign enemy. The psychological shock was profound. St. Augustine, watching the refugees stream into North Africa, wrote his masterpiece, The City of God, trying to make sense of the fall of the eternal city. The final decades of the Western Empire were a slow-motion collapse. Generals, many of whom were barbarians themselves, controlled the puppet emperors. The economy shrank, cities were abandoned, and literacy declined. In the year 476, the barbarian general Odoacer led a rebellion. He deposed the last Western emperor, a young boy named Romulus Augustulus, and sent the imperial regalia back to Constantinople, declaring that there was no need for a separate emperor in the West. The Roman Empire in the West had fallen, but Rome did not die completely. In the East, the Byzantine Empire, continuing Roman law and culture, survived for another 1,000 years. And in the West, the Roman legacy lived on through the language of Latin, the legal systems of Europe, the Christian Church, and the ruins of the great buildings that still stand today. The story of Rome is a reminder that no civilization is permanent, that even the mightiest empires can crumble under the weight of their own contradictions and external pressures. I hope you have enjoyed this journey through the history of Rome. It is a story that teaches us about the fragility of power and the enduring strength of ideas. Which Roman emperor do you think had the greatest impact on history? Was it Augustus, Constantine, Or maybe Marcus Aurelius? Let me know in the comments below and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more history content.